Good afternoon. On behalf of our team at RDIC, we would like to welcome Chris Unser. He's here this afternoon to discuss the type of work they do, the training they receive, the characteristics they're looking for in a candidate, the career opportunities, salary expectations, and their working conditions. Just a reminder before we begin that after you watch this presentation, please complete the survey found on our website either by using the QR code or go to our website at www.rdic.ca. By completing the survey, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift certificate, which will be drawn at the end of every month. So again, thanks, Chris, for this informative presentation to help students in their quest to make a better choice about their future employment opportunities. Take it away, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you kindly, Gord. So first off, I'll introduce myself. My name is Christopher Unser, and primarily I am a journey person, a red seal electrician. So that is the trade designation that I do have. And currently, I'm in a bit of a unique position as a business and membership development representative at the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local Union 2038 in Regina, Saskatchewan. So for the most part, I say it's a bit of a unique scenario because the majority of us as electricians are in the field. And so for today, I'll just be sort of giving a breakdown on what it means to be one of those field electricians. I do have 15 years experience in the trade. And so hopefully that will go a little of the way to give you some understanding of what it means to become an electrician. By all means, I am not the best there ever was, and there's lots that I will still have to learn throughout my career, but I'll try and give you a bit of a snapshot as to what it means to go through the process from the first day that you become employed to hopefully planning for some sort of retirement with the trade as your primary career. So, diving right in, a bit of a brief background as far as how I got into the trade. It was sort of a chance occurrence. I was scheduled to go on holidays from a different job, and those holidays were canceled. So I sort of had 2 weeks with nothing to do, and a friend of mine said, hey, come and help my boss out. He needs some help around the shop, cleaning up, this sort of thing, driving materials to and from different work sites. We're real busy right now. And so at the end of that sort of 2 weeks that I had vacation, I gave my notice and they invited me to stay on full time and become an apprentice electrician. And so to speak to that, that sort of goes into what the steps are to become an electrician. And that is what I would refer to as a direct entry method, that you are employed directly for an employer previous to becoming indentured as an apprentice. And so that goes both ways for the employee and the employer, and that you get to sort of see what a job site is like, how things are working with your coworkers in the field of construction. And for the employer, they get that sort of a chance to see how you are as an employee. And up to that first 900 hours that you're employed, they've sort of got a bit of a decision to make, in that Saskatchewan apprenticeship will currently only accept 900 hours to be put towards an apprenticeship once you become indentured. And unfortunately, I will today give a few brief anecdotes on things to watch out for. And one of them is just that sometimes an employer may put off or delay or postpone the employee's indenturement. And that sort of causes some issues for the affected employee. After 900 hours, you might continue working. The employer says, I just don't have enough journeymen on staff right now to indenture you, or I'm not certain about the future, so we'll hold off for now. And I've had employees or applicants come in and speak to me because they've worked for 2 full years, upwards of 4,000 hours, and Saskatchewan apprenticeship will only consider about 900 of those to go towards their apprenticeship because they weren't indentured after that first 900. So keep that in mind. The direct entry method is also preferable, in my opinion, to some of the others, which might be career placement through some sort of a pre-employment program where you're paying for schooling up front. You're learning a bit of the theory behind the trade. You might have some practical labs involved. And then after you've got that certification, you go out and you hit the streets and try and find a job. So my advice to everyone when they are thinking of getting into any trade is to try that direct entry approach. Go out and apply everywhere you can. Maybe you'll get lucky like me and you'll have a friend that has an employer who's looking for someone to help out. That gets your feet wet, if it were. And for anyone who does find success in that, great. And I always sort of give that brief analogy or that brief comparison to, if things are busy, you shouldn't hopefully have too much difficulty doing that. But it's a scenario where if things are slow out there, there's not much construction going on, not many employers are hiring, then people sort of lead down that pathway of, well, maybe I should take some schooling for it first. And I always just warn a little bit of caution, because in the scenario where you do take that schooling in a slow period, it might not have anything to do with you as an applicant. It's just the nature of construction. We refer to it as boom or bust. Things are great, everyone's working, there's lots of work to go around. And when things slow down in any economy, usually it's those construction spending ventures that sort of get put off or canceled or do not take place first and foremost. So right now, I'd have to say we're a bit of a construction downturn. And anyone who drives around the two major centers here in Saskatchewan, whether it's Regina or Saskatoon, you'll see that. There's not a whole lot of new construction going up in commercial or residential. And statistics from some of the construction associations would go to back that up. As well, when it gets into sort of the industrial world, same sort of idea. 10 years ago, there was lots of work to go around, and it was almost sort of pick where you want as far as your employer, because there was a labor shortage. People were coming from other provinces to fill in those gaps through either apprenticeship, or people of the journey person status could not fulfill the requirements of the employer. Lots of work to go around. And today, it's sad to say that we're seeing about the opposite of that. So unfortunately, I'm not trying to discourage anyone from getting into the trade or the trades in general. Just don't take it personally if it's difficult to find a position currently. No one seems to be hiring. Those job postings that do go up, even for someone with a journey person status, I've heard in the last week alone that one employer had upwards of 240 some responses overnight, so he took the job posting down, that for a journey person electrician. So with that being said, let's come around full circle. You have applied for a job, working for a electrical contractor. They've hired you through the direct entry method, or you've gone through some pre-employment program, and now you've finally working for a employer directly. The way your apprenticeship program will roll out is about 1,800 hours worked, and then 8 weeks or the equivalent in school. And so all that means is in the trades, especially the compulsory ones, like a construction electrician, you're out there working hands-on for 1,800 hours, which is, roughly the equivalent of a full year, 52 weeks at 40 hours a week, would be about 2,000 hours. So right in that time frame, 10 months working, 2 months in school, and you repeat that 4 times. At the end of which, you would write an interprovincial examination and hopefully be successful and become a journey person electrician. The biggest part with the education portion, I would say, is stick to your math. That's an important one. I know that what necessarily shows up on a test isn't what you will see in the field on a day-to-day basis, but that is a big portion of where we do see apprentices struggle is when it comes to the math and the technical training. Personally, I've had friends that were great apprentices, but the schooling held them up. They weren't successful a couple times, and they left the trade to do other things. So just going in beforehand with that knowledge that if I'm not really solid in math, maybe this isn't the best career path for me to try. And I'm not suggesting that you need to be a genius, but to be comfortable with at least a grade 11 math, and even better if you're comfortable and successful, B+ or above in a grade 12 math, you'll do just fine. Now, once we have taken that job, we're out there working through any level of our apprenticeship, we would hopefully be assisting a journey person and not left to our own devices for any extended period of time. And that could be anything from working in the hot sun or the freezing cold outside, to working comfortably inside some sort of a school setting or an office building, mall, facility, anything of the sort. Everything from a residential housing unit, apartment complex, to a grocery store, shopping mall, and upwards to the big industrial plants that we're referring to earlier when we talked about some of the potash mines or the oil refinery here in Regina. All of these will have electrical requirements, whether it's a house or a big industry. And so that means that we will have to have electricians on site to implement any new construction or any changes to that infrastructure that's existing. So for our job duties as electricians, could be anything from, like I say, out there in the cold, fighting with a shovel, trying to dig in freezing earth, which isn't too fun, or being cooped up in a nice, warm, cozy electrical room doing terminations for 3 weeks or more. And so it's a little bit difficult to sort of put one designation on the duties that you would be responsible for, other than to say, differing from other trades, it might be more appealing to someone who wants to see a diversified scope of work, wherein it's not the same repetitive task necessarily day after day after day after day. And in my personal experience, I have had a little bit of exposure to all three aspects, the three categories I would refer to as residential, commercial, or industrial. And so anyone who is interested in becoming an electrician, a journey person, I would hope that through your apprenticeship, you do get the chance to expose yourself to all three different categories. And I have had, anecdotally, again, applicants who have come in and they have only worked in one of those areas, primarily residential. Through the residential boom here in southern Saskatchewan, there was lots of new home construction going on and lots of apprentices being trained in new home construction. And when things started to slow down, they wanted to try and become commercial or industrial electricians and weren't having much success out there in the world trying to apply for these positions because they had only ever wired new homes for new home construction, and their employers found other better suitable candidates. So just be aware that if you have the opportunity through your apprenticeship to expose yourself to different areas or different sectors of the industry, great. By all means, something to push for and to keep in consideration as you do go through that. As far as equipment or tools and all the rest that we use, you know, hand-eye coordination is pretty solid. If you're relatively comfortable swinging a hammer, I'm sure you'll do just fine in the construction electrician trade. Usually when we do the career fair or something like this presentation, we'll bring in, you know, lots of different stuff to pass around, and I'm, you know, sad to say we can't do that today, and I just don't feel that there's quite as much use out of, you know, showing some pictures or me bringing in some handheld tools to wave in front of the camera. Suffice to say, lots of hand tools, lots of power tools, you know, and if you have any sort of a question as to what would be in a construction electrician's tool bag, we do have some of these resources on our website. I think it's referred to the tool list, and that's just at ivew2038.com. I'll maybe see if I can get a couple links off to the organizers of this presentation and see if we can get those posted in the video as well when they go live. So I do have a couple other things to touch on as far as the salary expectations and all the rest that go along with that. Big questions asked when we're getting into the trade is, you know, what can I make? And this one's a bit of a controversial answer in the sense that I'm going to say you could make anything between $0 to $250,000 in a year. And you'll say, what do you mean? And I'll say exactly that in the good times, when we're talking feast versus famine, it's boom versus bust. So in the boom times, when things are good, when there's lots of work to go around, there are absolutely instances of people being in supervisionary roles, whether it's a superintendent, general foreman, something to that effect. And they're working at very large industrial projects, working long hours away from their home and families for extended periods of time, perhaps even on the road. Yes, absolutely, they can have the capacity or the ability to make upwards of $250,000 in a year. Is that common? No, not necessarily, but it does happen. On the other end of the spectrum, when we're talking about $0 a year, what is that? Well, absolutely, during times when things are slow, there is the possibility, the very real distinct possibility, there will be no employment for someone who has a journey person status. They will not be able to find work, at which point they might run out of employment insurance and they might find themselves struggling to pay the bills. So absolutely, it is something that we do advise on to anyone who's interested in getting into the trades, because it's not for everyone. That cyclical nature of boom versus bust, of feast versus famine, is a very real product of the industry. When things are good, when things are booming, when there's lots of work to go around, we're training more construction electricians. And in fact, keep in mind that our trade was training for a long time, many years in a row, at a rate of upwards of 2 or 3 electricians to 1 of the next closest compared trade. And I think it was the plumbers, but I don't remember off the top of my head. The point is, we were training a whole lot of electricians going through the apprenticeship program and becoming journey person electricians. Now, unless the rate of market growth meets or exceeds that number of electricians being trained, it's going to come to sort of a scenario where we've got a bubble that pops. And that's where we're at today, wherein I said not that long ago, there was a job posting that went up. Over 248 people applied overnight because they were looking for work. And that's the scenario where the Stats Canada or Statistics Canada numbers don't necessarily reflect the real world situation. What I mean by that is that they might show the unemployment for construction workers at a given percentage, 10 or 15%, whatever that may be. However, that number might be skewed a little bit, because if I have a construction designation and I'm working in an alternative field, I might consider myself to be underemployed instead of just unemployed. I might not be captured when it comes to those statistics. And so, for example, if things are slow, there's no work as an electrician, I find myself working in a warehouse, driving a forklift, or working for Cal Tire, I won't show up as a unemployment statistic, but I'm definitely underemployed. And so I would guess that the percentage of unemployed construction electricians is much higher than what you might find in a quick web search. I wouldn't hazard a guess, but I would estimate just anecdotally from the number of applicants that we do receive, people who come in and look for work, that it is quite high, unfortunately so. The silver lining, or the good news, is that like all cycles, that will reverse, and we'll start to, hopefully before things get worse, get better, and see more and more construction jobs for not only just our members, but for all construction electricians across the province. So average salary, the median salary, again, this is going to depend on which part of the industry you're in. A residential electrician working 40 hours a week with very little or no overtime, they might be making upwards of $75,000, something to that effect. The commercial division, it could be right around that same margin or higher. And then into the industrial area, this is where you potentially would be peaking that six-figure, $100,000 a year on average as a journey person electrician. Again, if you're working full time. One of the negative side effects or symptoms is, as it were, when there is a construction downturn, is that the one variable that the contractors can control to become competitive or maintain that competitive edge against their competitors is the liquidity of employees' wage rates. And simply put, with all things remaining static, the cost of material, travel, fuel, equipment, all the rest, the one thing that's adjustable is the employee's wages. And so if I'm competing against ABC Electric down the street and I want to make my bid a little bit more competitive so that I'm awarded the work, I will adjust my employees' wages by lowering them, which gives me a better price, which makes my bid more attractive, and I'm given the work. And this sort of vicious cycle is often referred to as the race to the bottom. So be aware that that's out there, and that your labor that you're selling to your employer is just that. It's your commodity that you have a vested interest in making sure you get the best bang for your buck on. So currently, right now, someone brand new to the industry, brand new to the trade, you're out there hunting for a job, you've been offered a position with an employer, they've got you working, helping a journey person, learning the craft, learning the trade, and as you go through your apprenticeship and become a journey person yourself, you're out there working in the field, doing a multitude of different things depending on which sector of the industry you're in. And so we start to talk about, well, what are some of the rewards? Well, best parts of the job, there is a really nice sense of gratification when you put together something that's complex with your own two hands and get to see it come to life. Whether it's just flipping the breakers on the panel in a residence that's brand new and it's the first one you've been responsible for wiring from the ground up all on your own, or it could be a more complicated system involved in a commercial application or an industrial application. Absolutely, there are challenges and stressors that go along with that, and that could be under any sort of a guise, whether it is engineering not being accurate, where you've got a set of blueprints to follow and they're not quite on board with what exists in the real world. My favorite example was we were given it's called a chaseway or a conduit, and there was a certain number of cables that had to be installed in that chaseway. And when we went to the engineer and showed him a large bundle, around 24 inches around, and asked him, how are we going to get these cables through the chaseway that you've had constructed at 6 inches across, we all had a chuckle and said, this is one of the real world applications of engineering, does not meet the needs of construction. So we have to think outside the box on that one. By all means, a big challenge is maintaining your sanity when things are slow, when it's hard to find work, when you're always at risk of being laid off. Not necessarily true for everyone. There are lots of companies that have service contracts that can keep and maintain a contingent of employees year-round, whether or not they've been awarded that new school that's going up or the upgrades to the hospital. But I would consider it to be a majority of the workforce out there. We're sort of flexible and fluid with the industry. We go where the work is. So if company ABC was awarded this next big project, well, they're going to be our employer for the next 3 years. And until such time that you find yourself in one of those long-term steady employment positions, you'll be going where the work is, and your employer might change. The last time I did one of these in person, we had a group of fourth level apprentices there, and I asked the question of about 20 or 30 of them who had done their entire apprenticeship with one company, and not a single one of them put their hands up. And so just keep that in mind too, that part of being a construction worker in the trades doesn't necessarily mean being hired and staying at that same company for 35 years until you retire. That might not be the case. With that being said, career expectations, how long of a duration in this career can one expect to have? And I usually get a lot of flack for my next set of comments, which is, maybe 15 years. And people's eyes light up and they say, what do you mean 15 years? And I say, well, you're coming out of high school, graduating, maybe you take a year off, and before you get into the trade, you're in your early 20s. Next thing you know, you become a journey person and you're working solid. But now all of a sudden you're in your 40s, and look around. And I always ask construction workers of all trades, the same question. Look around. How many guys over the age of 50 are on the job site swinging a hammer or turning a screwdriver? The answer is usually not very many. And those that are of that sort of vintage, let's put it that way, 45, 50 plus, they find themselves in supervisory roles. They're running jobs, or they've started their own companies. But that's not necessarily for everyone. And so for those that are still expecting to be on the tools after 45 or 50, again, it's not necessarily a position that will be easy to fill. And another way to put that is, I had an applicant in who was in their 50s, and they had worked for 17 years for one commercial contractor here in Regina. And they said, I'm pretty stressed out right now because I know I'm on the wrong side of 50. And I've been at the same company for the last 17 years. Things got slow. They had to let me go. And I'm worried that I won't be able to find work. And in fact, to this day, that individual and I still stay in touch. And he's not in the trades anymore. He's got a sales position somewhere elsewhere, which is fine. But the point I'm getting to is that, again, as part of your career planning and your career goals, absolutely, they will love you when you're 22 years old and you take direction well, and you're willing to show up and put in a hard day's work for a hard day's pay. But as you get older and you get more wise, you might be less willing to climb to the top of that ladder and hang that light fixture in an unsafe manner. You might request the proper procedures and safety regulations are followed. And as you get a little bit older and wiser, your flexibility or willingness to continue on in such a manner might get a little bit less and less as days go by. You get slower, your knees are starting to bug you, maybe your wrist is starting to bug you, and before too long the employer turns around and says, let's get another one of those 22-year-olds because they're a lot faster, stronger, and less likely to give pushback when I offer them instruction. And again, please don't take that as our carte blanche across the entire industry. But I have seen it, and I do know of many examples of it. And I can attest to that on a personal level where you might have 15, 20, 25 years working on the tools before it's easier to replace you with someone who's younger, stronger, faster. And I don't see a whole lot of 65-year-old electricians, getting a gold watch on their day of retirement and putting away their tool bag. Let's just put it that way. So moving on, we've gone through sort of the wage rates. Depending on who you're working for, things like benefits and pension are going to be totally up in the air. If it's a contractor A versus contractor B, there's no sort of industry standard. Obviously, if you're working in a unionized environment, they might have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to buying into a larger pool for benefits and pension, that sort of thing. And all I mean by that is, the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, represents over 70,000 electricians in Canada. And so the buying power for things like, a pension and a benefits package might be a little better than if it's a small company with maybe 10 or 15 employees. When you're trying to find some suitable benefits, whether it's Blue Cross or Sun Life, you might have to pay higher premiums up front because it is a smaller group. Holidays pretty much follow the standard. You'll be paid out for your stat pay and your vacation pay. Between you and your employer, you can always make arrangements to have that put off or delayed until you actually do take that vacation time. But in construction, for the most part, what we see is that it's paid out on a pay period basis, whether you're paid weekly or bi-weekly. And that goes along with hours of overtime. Hopefully, if you're working an extension of, a 40-hour work week, 8 hours a day, you're receiving overtime for your pay. And that is sort of one of the areas that construction workers always used to flourish in, that if we were working long hours away from our homes, away from our families for extended periods of time, we were being well compensated for it in the form of an overtime. And if that is still the case, then great. And if it's not the case, I would say, what sort of a trade-off are we looking at here? Because part of being away from your family and your home, maybe you're working on the road or you're working in one of these industrialized settings, 21 days on and 7 days off. We do want to have that balance of work life and family. And in the past, when there was the offering for time and a half or even double time in many scenarios, employees could definitely take some time off when that project was completed and not have to worry about running out the door and finding a new job right away. Whereas if it's the case that all of a sudden, because things are more and more competitive, I've started to see employees coming to me saying, hey, I'm working long hours and it seems like they're getting away from the overtime. Where's the balance there? And I don't have an answer. I don't have the golden compass, if you will, to how to rectify that, other than to say, the silver lining is that this is a cycle, and as things start to pick up and turn around, things will hopefully get back to a point or a position where we are absolutely being compensated for our time. I have a few sort of frequently asked questions that I'll go through here at the end, and then I'll maybe open it to the floor if there's any questions from students or faculty that are in attendance. I'm sort of asked about what it means to belong to a union. Where does that fit in? What I would say, to be brief and to keep it simple, is that the union is not about a facility or a union hall or a union office. A union is about workers sticking together. And without that, it all sort of fails. And in a small example, if you can imagine going for your last job interview, I'll just make up some numbers on the spot here. Let's say your employer offered you, $15 an hour to start, and you turned around and said, "No, I'm going to take $20 as the lowest I'm willing to offer my services in exchange for compensation for." And your employer might say, "Well, no, thanks. We'll wait and see if we can get someone for 15." But if everyone comes through that door for that interview, sets that standard at $20 an hour, eventually the employer will get to a point where they'll say, "I've either got to pay $20 an hour for this employee, or I won't be able to find one." And that, in a very brief sort of casual way, is what it means to belong to a union. That at some point the group of workers has gotten together and said, "Hey, you guys, we should set standards, whether it's wages, working conditions, safety, pension and benefits that we require to work in this industry and still have that healthy balance of family and work life." And the second part of that question is usually, well, how do I join the union, or how do I join a trade union? And my answer to that is, it's relatively easy, but it's very difficult. And what I mean by that is, any group of workers anywhere can become union members in a very short period of time by having a union certification vote. And for anyone who's paying attention or has maybe heard on some of the different media outlets, whether it's social media or other, our favorite delivery company, Amazon, is just going through this process in Alabama with a group of warehouse workers who are, who have some concerns that they think would be better addressed if they had a union to represent them. And so that familiarity between what's going on in Alabama with the Amazon workers might just happen to be going on in your workplace. And if that's the case, it's between you and your coworkers, not the employer, whether or not you belong to a union or can belong to a union. And so if that same company, ABC Electric, has 10 employees and 8 of them decide that they think they'd be better off having a union to speak on their behalf, they have a vote in the workplace, it comes back with a majority yes, those employees are all now entitled to become IBEW or union members, whatever union it happens to be. And the other side of that sort of a request or question, I should say, is, that might not be an option. I might be unemployed. How do I belong to a union then? My advice is for anyone who is interested is to go down and speak to your local union representatives, and they might have an application process for direct entry to the union itself. Just not quite so cut and dry as, if 10 employees working for a company A, B, C vote in favor of becoming union employees or having union representation, it's a done deal. It's enshrined by law that those employees will now become union members, and that company will have to follow those sort of rules and regulations set forth in a collective bargaining agreement. With that being said, absolutely, for anyone who is interested in having a further conversation or asking further questions on that, I'm always available, whether it's by telephone or by email. And again, hopefully we'll have some of that linked in the information below. Other than that, I don't have a whole lot, so I'll conclude this presentation on that final note. And if there is any questions, I think we can turn on the mics right now and have at them. And if not, I'd encourage everyone to visit both of our websites, the IBEW2038.com. There's another one, Join the Brotherhood, sk.com as well. So I'll see if I can get those off to the organizers, and we'll get them posted as well.
Thanks so much, Chris, for that awesome presentation. Very thorough in what you have told our students today. I do have a question. I know, without looking into into a fortune teller's capacity here, in your years of electrical, how long does a downturn usually last? Like if we've got a student in grade 12 that's really interested in electrical, without discouraging them, what are we normally looking I mean, I guess maybe in a pre-pandemic, but now we've gone through a pandemic year, 2 years almost. Yeah, what would you say to students?
I think, again, this isn't my words, but I think the experts, whoever those may be, the economists and whatnot, they put these construction cycles in that 5 to 7 year sort of ups and downs. And again, there's too many variables to take into account. What I could say here in southern Saskatchewan, like if you're in the Regina area or in one of the rural communities as well, don't be too disheartened by it. We're a relatively small community, and so it doesn't take much to get people out and back to work. There's a new power plant going up in Moose Jaw. They're supposed to be starting it here anytime. And just like that, you could have a few hundred construction workers from each different trade back on site. And hopefully they all come from Saskatchewan this time around. But it doesn't take much for a province like us to sort of see us pull ourselves out of a slump like that. But generally, I would say that, you know, it's tough. It really is tough to pin it down to a specific time frame or a sort of duration of how long we're going to be in this. What I can say, though, is that from talking with some of the contractors out there, they see that there has been a lot, they say, let or put up for tender. The project's been announced, and now the contractors are going to start bidding on it. And it sounds like there's more on the horizon than there has been this last couple of years anyway. So that's good news.
Oh, that's awesome news. Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry for putting you on the spot, but I think it's good for them to know that there is hope, right? There is some positive things that are going to start happening soon.
There is. And I think it is, though, important to just be forthright, because you don't want to give someone the impression that, you know, once you start down this career path, you'll be employed right straight through until retirement, because that's just not the case. And you can ask different people through different parts of the construction industry that that often means maybe going out of province or even out of country to find employment. And absolutely, there are long-term positions within the realm of being an electrician. You could become a service guy over at the University of Regina and spend the entirety of your career there. And a good friend of mine is in fact one of those individuals. So those positions do exist. I'm sort of speaking to that more broader range of the majority of work out there when it comes to being a construction electrician is sort of a transient, right? The workers go where the work is. And, you know, 15 years ago, that meant going to Fort McMurray in Alberta in the oil sands, because there was a lot of money being spent and a lot of projects on the go and a lot of money to be made as a construction worker. And now that's just not the case. The oil and gas sector has seen some, you know, better days, let's put it that way. And because of that, those workers are now expanding elsewhere and they're looking for work. So it is sort of a unique career path to choose, in the sense that, you know, you're not just going to be showing up 9 to 5 at the same office every day and clocking in, clocking out. Just to be aware of that, I think, is really important.
Awesome, thank you. There's another question from the office here.
Chris, awesome presentation. I just wanted to know what you meant by red seal. I think some kids would not know what that is.
Oh, fair enough. So we're given what's considered a red seal designation when we are successful in our interprovincial examination as tradespeople, and you know that covers a host of different trades here in Canada. And with that red seal designation, you can generally travel anywhere in the country and it will be accepted as proof of your education. Whereas different industries, they might have different regulations to the training that you have achieved through your education, and they might not be recognized. I'm struggling to think of an example off the top of my head, but if anyone knows one there in the office, shout one out. But I know even within the realm of construction, we will have immigrants who have come from overseas or from south of the border from the US, and they have their designation, their education designation, and it needs to be reviewed to see if it's going to be accepted before they're eligible to work as a journey person here in Saskatchewan. And with the red seal, that's sort of just completely defunct, in the sense that anywhere in Canada, I can produce my red seal designation and be allowed to go to work as a journey person electrician. I hope that answered your question.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question from our office here, Chris.
So through the union, Chris, you mainly bid on commercial jobs, right? So it's commercial electricians.
Good question. I should specify, I didn't really get into it. My position here with the union is primarily to assist electricians, and that could be in any number of different ways, whether it is recruiting to find new employees for the unionized contractors that are looking to hire. It could be doing presentations like this or career fairs, a host of different things. So my position, there isn't a whole lot of them out there. Again, just speaking to the various different scopes of duty that an electrician would have. Through the unionized contractors, at least here in southern Saskatchewan, it's primarily of an industrial and a commercial realm. So we're talking again, big facilities like refineries, potash mines, and then into your commercial like industrial, whether it's hospitals or schools, that sort of thing. There's not a whole lot of unionized residential electricians out there currently, and I think that's just sort of a symptom of our marketplace here, where in southern Saskatchewan, there's quite a high turnover when it comes to those residential electricians. As far as the commercial and the industrial world is, it seems to be that there's a little bit more of a acceptance or a appetite, if you will, for a unionized workplace, as opposed to sort of the smaller niche residential contractors that are out there.
The young person going into the trade, you've got the options of the pre-employment and the apprenticeship route. I know I always recommend the apprenticeship route for kids, but when you're doing your training at Sask Poly, do you do both residential and commercial at the same time and then come out trained, or how does that work?
Good question. Good question indeed. They try and design through what they refer to as harmonization, sort of a scope of learning in that technical training portion. So again, we're talking about 8 weeks worth of in-school training, and that's both theory. So they'll have you do problems on paper, as well as the practical in the lab. And that lab will do its best to cover, the whole gamut, right from residential stuff in through bigger industrial stuff. Now, it's always been said, and it always hopefully will be said, that really the lion's share of your training will come on the job. And hopefully that's through good instruction through a competent journey person. And when you get to school, it's just sort of to polish those areas off. So you might have been exposed to, just for example, some conduit bending, but you're primarily a residential electrician. And so you haven't done a whole lot of that. Well, in school, there will be, whether it's half a day or a full day in the lab, just geared directly towards that, and some formal instruction from an instructor. So they do try and cover all of it. The time is limited. Like I say, it's only that 8-week period in a given year, 4 times throughout the entire apprenticeship. So that's why I do recommend, and I know it's tough when the market is not doing well and there's not a whole lot to choose from necessarily. But if given the option, if given the ability, if you're working as a residential apprentice and something comes up where you can branch out into the commercial or the industrial, jump all over it. Get as much exposure to different areas of the trade as possible, and that will just create a more well-rounded journey person when you're all said and done.
So you're basically adding value to yourself by doing that. Now, I know that you guys have a new training facility that you're just getting up and running, and I just wanted to emphasize to the students that you're never really done learning. You're going to be, constantly improving your skills and your knowledge. And what are you offering through that training facility, just so the kids are aware of it?
Fair enough. So it is a whole lot of that sort of a skills training component, because even like you say, 15 years down the road, it's been a while since I've worked on any given area of the trade. So whether it's fire alarm or automation or conduit bending myself, I know these terms might not necessarily mean anything to the young students watching. So suffice to say that different areas of the trade will not be worked on a regular basis. There's a whole diverse skill set that a well-rounded journey person will have. And by all means, I'm not an example of someone who knows how to do everything. And I would say that anyone who says they know how to do everything out there is maybe exaggerating a little bit. So in our new training facility that's being constructed, absolutely it will be a whole lot of those areas that maybe need brushing up on, or when our contractors come to us and say, hey, these are some of the projects that I have upcoming. It would be really nice to see some of the employees trained up in these areas. We could hopefully come to some sort of a training plan with them to make sure that we're giving them the best of the best when they go out there and they're on the clock. Otherwise, any of the standardized safety training that's required these days on job sites, that will be also provided as well. So it's just sort of a little bit of everything to keep ourselves up to date on new advancements in technology and changes in the industry, as well as just to hone our skills and craft. And part of that does unfortunately mean that we do need to keep up to date on the newest safety training. And I say unfortunately a bit tongue-in-cheek, because what we've seen out there in sort of, let's just say in the real world, is that some of the employers will be requesting certain levels of training before you start work. And our position, or my opinion, professionally, is that any of that safety training through the occupational health and safety standard should be provided by the employer, and not on someone who's struggling to find work, as it were. They're applying for a job. Now all of a sudden they have to go and take, a fall arrest course, an aerial work platform course, perhaps a first aid course, and it's borne on the back of the struggling employee. Leaves a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. And I won't go any further than that, other than to say it'll be nice to have that training center up and running and offering that training to members at no charge whatsoever.
Yeah, that's going to be excellent, Chris. Thank you very much. I wanted the kids to know about that training center.
Is there anybody else from our participants that would like to unmute and just ask Chris a question? You've done an awesome job here. Very good explanation on all levels here.
Well, thank you.
I think there's we might have one here. Kevin?
Kevin here from Rosetown. In a small town, I find, there's different little smaller electrical companies. Is there, or do you know of any statistics on something about the baby boomers as far as how many openings are going to be for kind of that small town, self-employed kind of electrician in the future, or is that hard to tell?
Well, that's a good question. And I guess there's sort of a double-edged sword to that one, in the sense, I know I spoke earlier of guys on the tools don't necessarily last into their 50s and 60s very often. And again, just my personal anecdotal experience, and then through what I've seen and run into with other tradespeople, they'll find sort of things that are easier on their body than turning wrenches all day long. And so the prospect of the small town shops, that's probably an area where those guys will stay working, but they're independent business, independent operators, right? So they run their own shop, and maybe they have 2 or 3 employees, or if they pick up bigger projects, they hire a few more, and they might stay in operation a lot longer than someone who's just seeking to be employed into their 50s. And as far as the numbers on that, no, you caught me off guard on that one. I wouldn't even want to hazard a guess as to how many of those independent contractors are starting to see sort of the end of the tunnel, as it were, on, okay, time to hang up my spurs and enjoy retirement. What I can tell you, though, is that for us in the construction electrician trade, we see, more so than any other trade, as far as I'm concerned, new companies start up overnight, and in that same vein, new companies close down overnight. And just to sort of expand on that real briefly, is that, even speaking with some of the electrical distributors, so the companies out there that sell the material and the tools to electrical contractors, these new companies are always coming in and applying for accounts. And so you can sort of track through just those numbers alone, the number of new companies that are starting up. And then as those accounts are closed because things aren't successful, the company didn't take off, and they're not able to keep the doors open, those accounts get closed. And so, again, not to discourage anyone, but it's just an example of, for electrical contractors expressly in those small town areas, absolutely, I would say that there's going to be lots of opportunity to take a run at it, make a go out of it, start up a new shop. As the local guy in town is maybe thinking about closing his doors and maybe moving on to greener pastures to put his feet up, sort of thing, right? Number wise, I apologize. I wouldn't hazard a guess.
Thank you. Good question and good answer.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions then.
Thank you very much, Chris. This is super informative. I really was impressed. Thank you.
Good. I hope so.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure, you guys. It was an absolute pleasure.
Have a good afternoon.
Hey, same to you.